All right, everyone. It is right on the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Um, Welcome to today's Pathway to Open Source webinar. The topic today is accessibility and usability with Aspen Discovery. My name is Jordan Fields. I am the Aspen product librarian, and I am joined today by my colleagues, Jesse, Kelly, and Kirsten. And really happy to have Kirsten here today because she is she's one of the developers on Aspen and does a lot with accessibility and usability, actually. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So we always like to start our webinars with the Aspen Discovery goals. And today we're really talking about goals 2, 3, and 4. So goal 2, maximizing user engagement. We are making sure with a lot of the things that we're doing with accessibility and usability that everything that all of your library's patrons are able to engage with the library over the website. Connecting every user with a personalized and accessible library home base. This is important for making sure that Aspen feels comfortable for your patrons, that it both works for them and they can change it to meet their specific needs. Because as we know, if you've ever worked in a library, many different patrons have many different needs. So we need those, we need Aspen to be flexible enough to meet that patron where they are and make them happy. The last is my favorite here in the list, especially when talking about accessibility, and that's about empowering library administrators to customize and expand Aspen. And I have some really fun stuff that I'm excited to show you about related to accessibility with that today. So let's get going. So first of all, what is web accessibility? This is the definition from the W3C, but this is very basic, just says every user, specifically users with a disability, needs to be able to perceive, understand, just use a website and be able to contribute in a comparable way to other users. So people with disabilities need to be able to do the same thing that any other user would do. But what I want to be a key takeaway from this presentation is that accessible design is good for everyone and it benefits everyone. And we're going to show you a couple of ways that that's true. So the first one that I like to think of is how we've designed traffic intersections. So I know when I'm walking down the street, I tend to be buried in my cell phone, either texting or lots of the times navigating. And that's kind of dangerous if you're thinking about just walking down the street. You don't want to walk right into an intersection. So we have some features on the screen here that were designed as accessible features that end up being helping everyone. So on the right, we have the little bumps in the pavement and the changing color. So if you're looking down at your phone, that indicates to you, hey, something is changing here. You need to pay attention. And obviously for someone that might have difficulty seeing, it helps them to have that texture. The one on the left is another one that ends up just being a convenience for us. When you get to the intersection, some of those intersections are long, you can hit that button, go back to paying attention to your phone or talking to your friend or whatever, and you're going to get that auditory indicator for someone that might be hard of hearing when it's time to actually cross the street. So either like that chirping noise or something that says cross. If it's even better, it'll tell you which street you're ready to cross. So again, accessibility. This design is good for everyone. My other favorite example is from streaming services. If you think about like Netflix or Hulu now, how many people tend to turn on those closed captions, even if they have no trouble hearing? I have teenagers in my household. It can get pretty noisy and noisy unexpectedly. And it's just great to be able, I can always check in on the words. And I've even noticed with some of the shows, they're starting to get a little artistic with the words, depending on the word placement and who's talking. And again, that's something that started as an accessibility feature, but that type of design ends up being good for everyone. So let's get specific with Aspen and accessibility. So Aspen is currently compliant with WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So if you hear someone say WCAG, that's what they're talking about. But we're compliant with 2.1 and reviewing the brand spanking new 2.2. Bywater is also a member of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And what this means is that we have access to a whole bunch of training materials, information, other people that are working on accessibility. And some of our developers are also members of other accessibility groups. So we're really trying to pay attention to this and focus on it for Aspen. Aspen has new releases, has new features released monthly. And because it's open source, those features don't just come from Bywater. They come from a number of organizations and in many cases, a number of libraries. So we do our best to make sure that everything is accessible as we're adding it to the code. But lots of people adding, which is great. And we don't always catch everything. So if we find something that is not compliant, we consider that to be a critical fix to resolve. So nobody's perfect. We recognize that, and we're all doing our best to keep making Aspen better and better all the time. So I want to go into a couple specific features that Aspen has for accessibility. One of these is for Aspen administrators, and this is where you're setting up your themes. So one of the things to consider is color contrast. You have to make sure that the contrast ratio between the text on the screen and the background is high enough so that people that have trouble seeing contrast can read. It's actually different for like large text versus normal text. These numbers here are for normal text. Anything that has a contrast ratio over 4.5 is considered okay. It's pretty good. It's not ideal. And that's where you see the little yellow with a contrast ratio of 4.94 or 5.33. What we really prefer is 7 or higher. That's the AAA highest standard is to have higher than 7. And those are the boxes that you see that are green. If it is lower than 4.5, we will not even let you save it in Aspen. We know that there are a lot of pages in Aspen. There's no way you can check them all. So what this does is really prevent you from creating a site that's not accessible for color, and it gives you an idea of how good your color contrast is. So yeah, that's just a feature for Aspen administrators. Another thing, as long as we're talking about color, is that you shouldn't use color to signify meaning, or you shouldn't use only color. Only is important here. You can use color to enhance the meaning of something, as we do in the example here. So if you look at the statuses for each of these different formats, the words tell you what the status is, but the color also gives you an indicator, but we have the words, so it's not only reliant on the color. So the yellow is it's not available at your library. You can get it somewhere else. So, caution, maybe just put it on hold. Don't go to the library. On the shelf means that it should be on the shelf at your library. And then the red, like stop, just put a hold on it. It's not going to be available. But again, we have those words there in addition to the colors. The next thing that we want to talk about is the flow of pages. So responsive design actually has a lot to do with accessibility. And we don't think about this until we think about people that have trouble reading small text. If you look at these two images right here, the browser where I took the screenshot was actually the same width. The one on the right, the text was just blown up 400%, which is frequently what people with difficulty seeing small text do. So we're talking about content flow, and what we initially did with responsive design, if you know anything about responsive design, is you would have the main content at the top, and then the sidebars would go underneath that main content. And that was just kind of how we did it. For something like filters, that doesn't really work, because when you're searching, you put in your search terms, and then you might look at the first few results and then realize, oh, I need to use a filter. Well, you're not even going to know the filters are there if that sidebar content is put all the way at the bottom. So instead, we change the flow once the screen size gets to be a certain, once it's blown up to a certain size. So if you look at those two examples there, the one on the left has those filters on the left. That's the full screen. Instead of doing the normal responsive design thing and putting that content down below, we've put it into a filter button that you see on the right, so that it doesn't mess up that flow for users that have made their screen really big. The next thing I want to talk about is considering the purpose of content. So within the web, we have a couple of different kinds of content, and there are some that you need to pay a lot of attention to, and then there are some that we mostly take care of for you. So the first one that I want to talk about is informational content, and this is where you have a lot of, where you have a little bit more power. So anytime you're adding information to Aspen, please think about, especially in things like alt text, how someone with a screen reader might be perceiving that information, or how someone with that's blowing up the screen might perceive that information. So if we're thinking about blowing up the screen and you have like a web banner describing the details of an event, how does that web banner look when the screen is blown really big? What alt text have you put in that web banner? If there's information there, you need to make sure that all of that information is in that alt text so that the person can understand everything that's in that image banner there. And I'll show you an example of how that works in Aspen in a minute. So that's the one that I want you to be thinking about as Aspen administrators. The other two are things that I want you to be aware of that we do in Aspen, but maybe are not so much things that you have control over. So functional content, and this is how when someone's navigating a website, content that helps them navigate. So a good example is if you're thinking of the next arrow in a book carousel, it needs to describe what that arrow does so that the person using the website understands, like, this is how this arrow works, because we understand that visually, but that won't be there visually. The other is decorative content. So an example here is book covers in search results. This is coming to thinking about how someone feels or how user-friendly it is. So, or usability, which is actually the topic we're going to talk about next. We don't have the content in Aspen. We don't have the data to be able to describe every single book cover. If we had it, I would love for us to have alt text that describes every single book cover, but we don't have that data. We don't get it from the publishers. So if you are navigating it with a screen reader, how annoying would it be as you're navigating search results to just hear book cover, book cover, book cover, book cover? That doesn't add anything to your experience at all. So we actually skip saying book cover in those cases, because why would we? It doesn't actually add anything to someone navigating the website that way. So those are the three different kinds of content we're talking about. There is another kind of content, complex content, and that's more like if you think about trying to navigate a map with a screen reader. I did not call that out here because that is not something that we don't have that kind of content in Aspen, so it's not really something that we worry about too much. These are really the three that we think of. So for that informational content, here's an example of what we do in Aspen and also what I want you to think about. So what you're seeing right here is a placard. A placard, if you're not familiar, is when you search any term in Aspen, you can create kind of like a banner kind of thing that comes to the top of search results. So if you can set it up so if the user searched for genealogy, yeah, you're going to have a bunch of awesome genealogy books, but you also want them to know about Ancestry.com, then this little thing comes up at the top. These look really good as images, as you can see here, but there's nothing, all you have then is the alt text to read. So the alt text here is completely descriptive of all of the information in the banner right here. You don't want the banner just to say Ancestry.com because that's not the information that is actually in this banner. So make sure that as you're adding alt text that it provides all of the information in the banner. And then, like I said earlier, test how these things look on different size screens. Because it might not look the way you want it to look, or once it's blown all the way up, the text might get too small, for example, and then you're going to want to rethink how you design this particular image. So yeah, that's what you all can do with informational content. Another thing that we do when we have the data available in the MARC records, we can indicate when that content is accessible. So you see we indicate with a common symbol. So this is a symbol for closed captioning. It's something that our patrons are used to looking for. And when we get to usability, we'll talk more about what patrons are used to looking for. This is a symbol they understand. As in this example, there are actually 3 different versions that they could check out. In this case, they're all closed captioned. Maybe only one is. By showing them this common symbol that they understand, they know which one might be better at meeting their needs, and they can place a hold on it. Again, something like this is going to be dependent on whether or not we have the data available in Aspen to display this symbol. Now, there's actually more you can do with Aspen Discovery that's not. I think this is more because it's above and beyond how you can help people with specific needs better use Aspen, better just to show it. So something that we've added in the last year, we've always had we've had multiple languages for a long time, but we've also added multiple themes to give our patrons the ability to choose a theme that is more comfortable or just allows them to better use Aspen. These are available to patrons that whether they're logged into Aspen or not. What you see right here is Swan's library website. They have the languages and display up in the upper right-hand sign, upper right-hand corner. There we go, words. If you click on languages and display, I'll show you what that looks like. So it brings you to these display settings. You can choose your language, depending on what languages the library has enabled. You can also add as many themes as you want for different needs. So here, Swan has a default mode, dark mode, and then an optimized for high contrast on white. So we can see what those look like. If you are logged in, so I will say, if you change this, it will remember it as a browser cookie. You can always change it back. That's not a big deal. If you are logged in, you won't see this screen. You're going to see your actual settings, so you can save it as a setting, so it always works that way when you're logged in. Okay, so this is Swan's default theme. I wanted you to see it, so when I show you the other examples, you'll understand what it's kind of compared to. It's a gray background. There's some turquoise highlights, and then a lot of the text is black, and then some of the boxes are white, just to note that. If you were to change this to optimized for high contrast, everything here is higher contrast. So we don't have the turquoise, we don't have the gray. It's a darker blue on a white background. It's a black on a white background. So this is what you would use if you had trouble seeing contrast, and maybe you wanted to make sure that if we were looking at those contrast ratios earlier, I would recommend if you were setting up one of these themes, you would want everything to be over 7. You would want everything to be, way up high in that range. But this is what Swan has done. The next one is my favorite because this is another example of how accessibility is good for everyone. I love dark themes. I don't use them for everything, but I use them for a lot of things. I just like them. They're easier on my eyes all day, but some people need a dark theme. They can't handle that glare all day or even for part of the day. So here we have Swan's example of their dark theme. I really like this one too. They changed up their logo. It's this nice, I always think of the swans in the dark. It's kind of this nice black and white logo, but they've also still been able to incorporate their theme colors with that turquoise here. So these are the 3 themes that Swan offers their library. Now, you might be thinking, I've set up a theme in Aspen, like it took a good amount of work to get that to be exactly what I wanted. Now, Jordan, you're telling me I need to do that how many more times? Do I need to do it again? Like, how hard is this going to be? We definitely recognize that, and that we're trying to make this as easy for you as possible. So what we have is something we call the community content server. And this is where you can share both languages and themes from the community. So anyone in the community can contribute a theme, and then if they have contributed that theme, you can download that theme and use it or adjust it. You don't have to use it just the way it comes. So if you're within themes, if you're an Aspen administrator that has permissions to edit themes, you will see at the bottom of your list of themes, and this is from Darien Public Library, their import community content button. If you click that import community content button, you will get a pop-up that says find community content. And then you import one of those, it just brings it in as a theme. It does not bring in everything. You're not gonna want another library's logo. Like there are a couple things that you need to adjust there, and chances are you're gonna wanna adjust things anyway. This is really just to give you a head start on one of those themes. And we have some that we've contributed at Bywater. If you see one on another library website that you really like, contact that library and ask them if they're willing to contribute, and you can tell them to import the community content. We can also do that for you if you see a theme you really like. In this way, anyone can share all of these themes, because these themes, they take a certain amount of work, and we don't have a lot of crossover with patrons, so there's no reason why we can't share each other's work to make this easier, and then all of our experiences can be better. In the bottom right, that just shows you if you're in a theme and you want to share that particular theme with the community, you do have that share with community button. We do approve those themes, so it might take a little while to show up, but that's how the community content server works for themes. Okay, so that's a lot on accessibility. We have a little bit of time left for usability. So here we have the definition from the ISO on usability. I'd like to call out the words in bold: effectively, efficiently, and with satisfaction. So effectively to me means, can the user do what they need to do, what our goal is for them to do? Is it possible? Efficiently, can they do it easily? How many clicks does it take? how many steps, and the last one, with satisfaction. This to me, well, I guess effectively is the most important, like, can it be done? But with satisfaction is super important because this is how they feel when they are using your website, and how they feel when they're using their website a lot of the times is how they feel about you as the library. So we pay attention to this satisfaction. So a little bit about Aspen and usability. The first thing we do is on the team that's deciding, how to build features. We looked at common web patterns that our patrons are already using. So we'll look to Amazon, we'll look to Barnes and Noble, the reason behind that is we don't want patrons to come to our website and have to figure it out, have to learn how to use it. It needs to be intuitive because it needs to work like everything else works. So when we're doing something new, we kind of do a survey of how the most common websites do that thing. And that actually helps us a lot with usability. The next thing is that Aspen is built on others open source software products. They've been around for more than a decade, and developers and libraries, we've been doing both formal and informal usability testing for that entire time. And I'm going to get more into formal and informal usability testing in a minute, but this is something that has changed over time, is constantly being improved based on user feedback. The last thing I want to call out is that partnering with libraries is so important for us because you are the ones that hear directly from the patrons that use Aspen, that have access to the patrons that use Aspen. And Aspen is primarily a patron tool. We have the ILS for staff, and that's great. But we really want Aspen to work for patrons, and patrons are our focus there. Okay, so a little bit about Aspen and user testing. We do formal usability studies sometimes. A lot of the libraries like to do this. And a formal usability testing study, or formal usability study, is where the participants know they're coming in for this. We have a script. We ask them to do very specific things. We're either recording them or we're taking notes. And then typically we get a report afterwards with recommendations and a whole lot of information on exactly what happened during that test. These are great. They take a lot of time, they can take a lot of effort, and sometimes they're a little off-putting to patrons because I kind of feel like they're taking a test, but nevertheless, they're a great thing to do. The other thing is informal usability studies. You can do this anytime you want. When I worked in a library, I used to do it all the time. I would set up my computer and simply ask people questions. Just ask them to do something and give them, they were called book books that they could use in the library bookstore. Great. And that's a really great way to get a whole bunch of feedback in a very short period of time. We also sometimes we think of our code releases as informal usability studies. If we make a usability mistake, we hear about it really fast. And because we release so quickly, we're able to correct those. It doesn't happen a lot. But I think it's one of the great things about how flexible and how quickly we can release. The last thing on the screen here is not about usability. It's a type of user test, and I like to call it out because we don't do this type of user test. It's called A/B testing. It's where you have an email, maybe it's the same content of the email with two different titles, or we used to see it a lot in social media where it was the same article linked to, but with different images. And they're really testing users to see what gets them to click on something. I don't like these. We do get asked about this every once in a while. I don't like them because to me, you are then engaging a patron in a study that they're not aware that they're participating in, and it feels creepy to me. I have kind of some ethical questions around it. We don't do any of that. We don't find that it's necessary, but people ask, so I wanted to call it out here. So here's an example from one of the formal usability studies that actually Swan Library Network did this one. You have a note from the report on the left. You can kind of see exactly what we get in that report. And I like the quotes in here. My favorite quote in here is that the participant B noted that they liked that the filters applied scooched left. That to me is a satisfaction with the site. Scooch sounds like a happy word. You just get the sense that they're satisfied with this. And then you can see on the right the image that they were responding to with these new filters. Based on this study is how we designed the filters for Lida, our app. We also have some designs that we want to implement in Discovery. Facets and filters are really interesting, and how they work is changing. Metropolitan, one of our new libraries out of Oklahoma City, recently, just last week, shared a usability study that they did with their patrons. And with the questions that they asked, patrons did not use filters. They also did a study with staff. Staff use filters all the time, but I found it fascinating that the patrons didn't. They didn't need them necessarily. Relevancy is good, but they weren't using them. So we're looking at some different facet designs, and these are actually also based on Target. If you want to go to Target and see something that works like this in the wild, but how we can change facets to make them more user-friendly and continue to evolve to meet changing web standards. All right, I'm going to try to get a little bit. Let's try to wrap it up here so we have some time for questions. This is my favorite quote. I share it whenever we talk about user experience, and it aligns nicely with accessibility. When UX doesn't consider all users, shouldn't it be known as some user experience or sucks? So that is, I think that kind of sums it up nicely. Before we go to questions, we do have another webinar coming up on December, oh, this is where I can't see it because my Zoom is covering up, December 6th at 1 p.m. And you can learn all about implementing Aspen and Koha together. And I know that Morgan and Don are going to do a great job with that webinar. So thank you so much. I will see if we have any questions. Again, I'm Jordan Fields. I'm the Aspen product librarian. If you reach out to us at sales, you'll probably be talking to Bill Kessler, our Aspen sales consultant. And do we have any questions?